welcome. Thank you for coming out today. You already know how excited I am to be co-hosting this talk on racialized bodies in the outdoor spaces with the Cultural Diversity Office. As we've been exploring in the course, the ways systemic racism and racialized violence shapes who belongs or not, and the experiences of racialized bodies and their access to urban nature spaces. And our talk today is going to expand on that learning from lived experience and incredible community-based work of two lifelong outdoor learners and adventurous. So we'll get to their introduction in a moment. First, Alexis Charles from the Cultural Diversity Office, who I will also further introduce in a moment, but is going to open our talk with a land acknowledgement. So,
yes.
Thank you, Alexis.
Awesome. Thanks. So if you will all join me in just holding some space for this land acknowledgement.
Here.
Oh, yes. The University of Guelph is located on the ancestral lands of the Arawonderong people and the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Haudenosaunee that bound these communities to share the land and protect the land. The Dish with One Spoon covenant asks us to take only what we need and to ensure there is enough for all. All of us on this land, regardless of our relationship to it, have an obligation to uphold this treaty, and this treaty is particularly relevant to our conversation today since we are talking about the experiences of racialized people on this land. We do land acknowledgements not only to honor and pay respect and acknowledgement to the First Peoples whose land we are on today, but also to spend time thinking about the ongoing impacts of colonialism and our own relationship to it. Today we are engaging in a conversation about what it means to be Black in natural spaces, access to nature for racialized people, and experiences of violence or harm in accessing nature. It's important to think about how we got to this place and the history that's taken place before us. Many of the natural spaces on this land have been stolen from Indigenous communities and are now inaccessible to the very people who used to call it home. For example, the Algonquin people have been fighting for 200 years to regain control and access to their land, which includes Algonquin Park, and the development of this national park came at the direct expense of Indigenous people who were displaced without consultation or compensation and are still fighting for sovereignty over their land today. So as we talk today about what it means to access natural spaces as racialized people, to reclaim these spaces, to disrupt the norms in these spaces, we need to situate the conversation in the broader landscape of ongoing colonization and occupation of Indigenous land, and recognize that our fight to increase access and equity to natural space for racialized people must occur alongside the fight for Indigenous sovereignty and giving land back to those who it's been stolen from. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alexis. I so appreciate you taking the care and the time to open and situate this talk in such a good way. And so today we have three amazing women joining us for this talk. Dionne Daley and Sienna Hamilton are our guest speakers, and Alexis Charles is facilitating the conversation. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of them. So Dionne Daley is currently the Vice President of Innovation Research of Ipsos, a global market research and public opinion company. Dionne is an undergraduate at the University of Guelph, where she completed a BA honors degree in psychology, followed by a postgraduate diploma from Georgian College in the Research Analyst Program. Outside of work, Dionne is an active outdoors woman and advocate for diversity in the outdoor community. Since her childhood, she has been exploring the outdoors, wandering the forest near where she grew up, and worked as a tripper at Algonquin Park. Today, she's a board member of a Guelph Outdoor School and the Yorklands Green Hub in Guelph. And recently, she's launched a new initiative called the BIPOC Outdoor Gear Library, Guelph, which aims, doesn't just claim, it aims to reduce barriers in accessing nature, but I'm sure she'll tell you more about that soon. And then we have Sienna Hamilton, the director of the Guelph Outdoor School, and a self-described writer, wanderer, thinker, and mother. Ciana envisions a world where every kid has the opportunity to explore, learn, and immerse themselves in the natural world. Sienna is constantly looking at ways to connect with land. She is a strong advocate for traditional land stewardship and caretaking. And through her own journey, she has found an affinity for plants, trees, and birds. Sienna loves to tell the story that it is never too late to connect to the natural world. Sienna holds a fresh perspective on how families and communities can benefit from nature immersion programs. She works hard to recognize and dismantle the barriers that prevent youth from getting outdoors. She holds a firm belief that an early and authentic connection to nature are the building blocks to a lifelong journey of self-awareness. And leading today's talk and facilitating it is Alexis Charles, coordinator of cultural diversity programs at Student Experience. In this role, Alexis provides support and resources to BIPOC students at the University of Guelph. By creating spaces for cultural celebration, advocacy, and social justice, Alexis ensures that our campus and community is inclusive, supportive, and welcoming. This is done through year-long mentorship programs, transition programs, and skill-building workshops, as well as community building and social events. And I just want to say thanks again to each of you for being here today, supporting this learning opportunity. Real quick before we get started though, one quick logistical note for the class. Please save your questions till the end of the talk. Alexis will facilitate the Q&A at that time. Also, this event is being recorded with the permission of our guests, but the recorder will be turned off for the question period. So, without further ado, I turn it over to you, Alexis.
Awesome.
Thank you
so much, Dawn, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's always weird hearing your bio. For some reason, right? But yes, that is me. So my name is Alexis, as you heard. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the coordinator of cultural diversity programs in the Student Experience Department. So in my role, I essentially support or develop and facilitate programming that supports the development of Black and BIPOC students at the university. So as you heard, this sounds like mentorship programs, this sounds like arts-based workshops, and also discussions like this where we have the opportunity to really expand our knowledge, expand our analysis of issues in the community like this one. So I'm really excited to be joined by Dee and Ciana for this chat today. So without further ado, let's get started. So did you folks want to introduce yourselves maybe?
Yeah, you've done a good job.
You good? We good? Okay, it was thorough. Okay, then I'll start with the first question. So if you both could take us back to when you first started developing a relationship to land and natural space. How did you get started? What was your early exposure to the outdoors, and how was it supported or facilitated?
Want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Pass the mic. Hi, everyone. You can call me Dee for short. I was really fortunate and privileged to get access to the outdoors at a very young age. When I was quite little, my parents took us camping, took us hiking. We did a lot of road trips. And so I had some early exposure. That said, I really gained that access because I grew up in a predominantly white community with white mother. And so that was sort of normalized for her and became normalized for me. That said, I very much was sticking out like a sore thumb in most campgrounds as the only Black kid running around with all the other white kids. So, at that age, it really wasn't something I thought much about because I was just enjoying myself like any other kid. But it certainly became more and more something that I started to take notice of as I got older and continued in these spaces, like working in Algonquin Park, where I was one of very few racialized folks in that environment, and often was questioned for my presence there, why I was there, and if I was somehow misplaced or I was lost in some way. And that was just really eye-opening to me. I'm like, no, of course I'm not lost. This is nature. This is where I'm supposed to be. But it was very clear that this was a space that maybe I wasn't the most welcome in. But yeah, that's kind of where it all started for me.
Hello, everybody. So for me, I was also pretty fortunate to grow up in an area that I had a lot of access to wild spaces. I grew up in Pickering, which was really close to a lot of trails and sort of like Ontario. So I did a lot of biking around and exploring on my own and kind of just being a kid, wandering, being curious about the little creatures that I lived next to, creating small forts and hideouts in forests and that sort of thing. I grew up with a lot of connection with my grandparents. So my grandmother is German, and she was an avid hiker and gardener, and so we would do a lot of that stuff together. But I always kind of remember like feeling a bit displaced with her. She was obviously like, you know, my grandma and like made me feel safe and comfortable in most situations, but I do remember the stares. I remember the like question, like the eyes that were sort of questioning what was I doing here, or, you know, that sort of thing. My real connection with nature was shaped with my grandfather, who is Jamaican, and he was a lover of fish. He loved to fish. And so one of the key moments for me was going out to Rice Lake with him on a week-long sort of like cottaging trip, and we went fishing. And it was like life-changing for me to be with somebody who was like my family member, but also somebody who represented who I was as a person visually and culturally. And to also feel and see his knowledge. You know, he wasn't somebody who was unsure of his place in the natural world. He wasn't somebody who was questioning his capabilities. You know, he passed along a lot of really good, you know, at the time, fishing tips, and, you know, taught me how to cast and all of that really cool stuff. And so that was really a catalyst moment for me to like find my place with him.
Yeah, I really love hearing both of your stories and that sense of like that childlike wonder that you spoke to with, you know, discovering your environment and seeing what's there and just really seeing the world as your playground. I really appreciate that. In terms of myself, my relationship to nature, growing up wasn't too strong, to be honest. So just a bit of background about myself. My parents were immigrants from Trinidad, but I was born here in Canada, and I grew up in Brampton in an apartment complex that had a lot of a high immigrant population, kind of a low-income apartment complex. There wasn't a lot of nature around. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Brampton, but when I see Brampton, I don't really think trees and parks necessarily. So, yeah, and it's interesting. My dad actually, if there was any connection to nature, it was through my dad. He was a very active person, so he liked to walk a lot. He liked to take us biking, things like that, in the spaces that we could find, like, again, not any elaborate trails or anything like that, but, you know, instead of driving to school, we walked to school. Instead of driving to our swimming lessons, we walked to those. So I have really great memories of, like, walking through those parks, chasing him, trying to catch him, climbing those trees. And then by contrast, my mom, to this day, is afraid of nature. And I'm not sure there are, like, many reasons for that, but she would often, you know, even like tell my dad, like, why are you taking them out in the bush? Everything for green people is the bush. If it's not the street, if it's not concrete, it's the bush. So why are you taking my kids in the bush? Yeah, and you know, she would kind of get upset with him. She warned me, you know, don't be out in these trees and these bushes, things can happen. The amount of times I've heard there are crazy people out there to this day. My mom loves to say that. So there's clearly a lot of kind of fear and trauma connected with my mom's relationship to nature. And it's interesting the kind of generational shift that I see, whereas my grandma also from Trinidad moved to Canada, but she would tell me stories of growing up where she was quite connected with the earth, with like you were saying, she would be playing outside, she would go in the bush and barefoot and, you know, connect with the earth that way. She'd tell me how she'd use raw coconut oil on her skin and, you know, other ways of like interacting with the environment. So I always found it interesting how my grandma, at the time, was so connected to the earth, and then there's almost like a fear. So I kind of grew up with that duality where I had some family members who were all about nature, and then others who are a little bit more fearful. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you folks. So if we can move on to, I guess, the next question. So you told us a little bit about your relationship to natural spaces growing up, but how has that changed now, and what would you consider your relationship to nature to be like now?
So now, I think at the time, like when we're kids, it's just playful and whimsical, and you just coexist with the natural world in a way that is effortless. I would say now, being like where I'm at in this moment in time, I'm connecting to different aspects of the natural world that I don't think I would have if I hadn't had those early sort of exposures. I'm really into figuring out like the human history of where we are, and how we've sort of like come to this place of stewarding the land, and the ways in which cultures from the beginning of time have done this. I also see the importance in making sure that young kids have the same sort of opportunities that I had, even if it's just one summer camp, even if it's just one day trip, you know. It's life-changing, it really is. For the first time, I just ran like a 4-week summer camp in the Shelldale neighborhood this past summer. And it was all BIPOC kids, with the exception of 1 or 2. And it was all of their first times being in a full day outdoor camp. And these are kids who are just on the other side of town. At our regular sort of like Stone Road programs, as we call them, those are kids who are doing this weekly. Their parents are pulling them out of school so that they can come and have a day in nature. So there's like such a stark contrast between these two groups, and it's the same city. I think I'm really starting to recognize the barriers that are in place for kids who aren't able to access those spaces. It's lifelong work, and I think for me it's really shaped how I view the natural world.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot, that it took growing up and really seeing the privilege and the access that I did have to realize that that's not the same for everybody. Even Alexis, you talked about like you growing up in Brampton and that there wasn't a lot of nature around. You think about even access to places like Algonquin Park and how that requires transportation. You know, being able to get out of the city and get there. And that's not available for everyone. And that's something that I really took advantage as a child, and I'm realizing that that's unfortunate that kids don't have this in their backyard like I did. I really kind of see that as a privilege of mine. And then, like you're saying too, Sienna, as a nature lover, your focus shifts to how do I make sure that we can remove some of these barriers and make nature access available for everybody. And that's part of the work that I'm doing. You know, I've been following a lot of folks online. Come to me after if you want like a lengthy list of Instagram accounts to follow of people who are doing this work, who are very focused on diversifying the outdoors, like quote unquote, but ultimately changing the conversation, advocating for representation in media, in the outdoor retail stores. You know, people who were calling out MEC, a couple of years ago for saying like, hey, only white people in your advertisements. Like, I don't see myself represented. Making access to transportation, to the gear like I'm doing, to school and other programs. Like, there's just so many things that can be done to change up what's happening. And that's ultimately, as you grow older, where your focus starts to shift, because you realize that there's just so much benefit to be had. And I hope that all of you have had at least one of those moments too, of that whimsy that you had as a kid. And for me, that really hasn't stopped. I just want to make sure that more people have that availability.
Yeah, for sure. When I go out on my walks and that in Guelph, one of the things that I love to see are the children who, they're often unsupervised, but again, that sense of wonder that they have. They'd be like in the river, water up to their waist, just playing, just having a great time. And then on the other side of things, like you were saying, Ciana, there are some kids who don't even know what that's like, what that is, right? And just those disparities that we need to address as a community. So thank you for sharing that. I could say my relationship with nature, now it's better for sure. I've had to unlearn a lot of the things that I've kind of grown up, the fears and things that have been instilled in me, with good intention, around being out in natural spaces. And I always say that, this is one of the reasons that I chose to move to Guelph from Brampton, was because there are more, natural spaces, there are more trails. That's something that I really enjoy. And I found that my relationship to nature really changed actually during the pandemic. Because I do consider myself an active person. Like, I used to be in the gym 6 times a day. It was too much, I know. So I used to be in the gym really often. What else did I do? Biking, running, but it was more like on the street, not really kind of in nature, in that sense. But during the pandemic, when things shut down and I was kind of at a loss, I'm like, if I'm not gonna go to the gym for 6 days, what am I gonna do? That's when I reconnected with nature. So I started running in trails more. I started biking. I started doing things like taking off my shoes and running in the earth and going in the river after my run because I was so hot. And those experiences were just so healing to me. And I was like, how did I miss out on this for so much of my life? Like, this is incredible. Finding more ways and opportunities for BIPOC folks to access these healing spaces, I think is so, so crucial and important, because there's just so much to be found. There's so much to be found about nature, and then there's so much to be found about yourself while you are in nature. So.
And Alexis, I feel like pass the mic. I was gonna say, I feel like you're not alone in that. Like, the pandemic has sort of forced everyone to find new ways of being active and connecting with each other and our environments. When everything else is taken away from us, what else do we have but the outdoors? And that's why we're seeing so many people kind of going camping and discovering these types of activities, which is wonderful. But it also means that, a lot more people are being put into these situations where they're either faced with not feeling welcome, or there's, that certain amount of fear around, well, what does this mean and how do I do this? And, all the questions around it. It seems simple to pitch a tent, but it's more complicated than you think to do that kind of thing. And if you don't have people to show you how, I don't know, there's just a lot of ways that, especially given the pandemic and our new relationship to nature and the outdoors, we can collectively do better to make it a comforting space for everyone and have it be just as magical.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and just making the process just seem just less intimidating and more, how long I wanted to go backcountry camping, but I am terrified. I don't even know where to start. But we're right here, so we'll make it happen. Awesome. So obviously you both are doing incredible community-based work to increase access to outdoor natural space and land-based learning for racialized people of all ages. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing, specifically what your work is responding to, and how you end up advocating for change in these spaces.
Go for it.
Okay, so recently I am one of the co-directors of the Guelph Outdoor School, which is one of the projects of the Village Earth Initiative. So we're a local not-for-profit organization that focuses on nature connection. The Guelph Outdoor School started 9 years ago with my colleague Chris Green, who saw a need for kids who weren't doing well in a traditional classroom setting. Since then, the organization has evolved quite a bit to the point where they needed a second director, and that's where I sort of slid in. I started with the Guelph Outdoor School in September of 2020 as a staff, just as like a leader for the Nature Connection programs. And very quickly, I was, bugging Chris about things that I was seeing around, how well the programs were going and some of the really big gaps that I saw. Some of which were, the school has always had a sliding scale model where they dissolve pretty much any financial barrier. So finances are not a barrier for coming to the outdoor school. But what I was starting to notice is that that's only one barrier. kids were showing up with inadequate clothing, inadequate food. They were showing up feeling obviously a sense of not belonging. If you are the only black kid with 13 other white kids who have been here before and know the trees and know the birds and know the rivers and like have this incredible lunch that can sustain them for the entire day. And your teachers are also, for the most part, cis, able-bodied white men, then that's a barrier. Is that kid gonna come back? Is that kid going to really get what they need to get out of this experience? So through many, many conversations, we just started to work together on trying to dismantle some of those, trying to figure out what else can we be doing as an organization to make sure that we're truly meeting every kid and every family where they're at. So these days I'm focused on the other project of the Village Hearth Initiative, which is the Village Hearth Community School. It's a community-based private school that's running out of the Shalldale Center right now. And one of the main missions of the school is to have BIPOC kids from that neighborhood, from the Onward Willow neighborhood, coming into the school and having access to equality, like an alternative education. So it's a hybrid program with Montessori learning for half of the day and then outdoor nature connection for the other half of the day. All kinds of barriers there. It is not as easy as just walking into a neighborhood where they don't know who I am, they don't know what organization I'm part of, and here I am trying to pitch, a school that they don't get. They don't get it. They're like, why would I pull my kid out of this great public school to send them to a school where they're outside for half of the time? So a lot of my work right now is trying to tell the story, is trying to, for lack of a better word, trying to show the value in what these sorts of programs can offer. And other than that, it's just a lot of administrative work, a lot of being behind my computer answering emails, but I'm also very much on the ground, just facilitating programs, having kids, working with kids with a lot of trauma, tons and tons of trauma, working with kids with just neurodiversity as well. So that's really at the heart of my work that I'm doing.
And I'll just sort of, before moving on to the stuff that I'm doing, well, actually, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm also on the board for Guelph Outdoor School, as well as Yorklands Green Hub. And when I got connected with Chris, it was a very similar story of me saying, all great, what you're doing, and there's a lot of things that need to change in making sure that there's, that feeling of opportunity and access for all the children, no matter what they look like in Guelph, because it didn't feel like that was a focus, as great as he is. Having Ciana on board has made changes, they've made changes in leaps and bounds, because it's really important, like you said, to have representation even in who's teaching you and who's sort of sharing those programs. So I'm thrilled that you are there with the Guelph Outdoor School, because it's wonderful. The other group that I'm involved with on the board is called the Yorklands Green Hub. There's sort of there's the old OR off of York Road. I don't know if anyone's been out there. That's the correctional facility that existed in Guelph. Long sort of passed on that, but anyway, there's beautiful natural land that surrounds the area, and there's a group of people who are really trying to kind of preserve that as a nature conservation area, a learning center. So I'm a part of that conversation as well. But aside from that, just within this last year, I kind of went down this path of I need to do something more than my day job, and that is sort of focusing a little bit more on what I love to do, and that is being outdoors and as the conversation has already happened, finding ways to reduce the barriers. And for me, I was inspired by other people, especially in the States, who are putting together what are called gear libraries. Think of any kind of a lending library, there's the Guelph Tool Library in town, but focused on outdoor gear. The reason being is that one of the key barriers to doing activities like camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, whatever the case might be, is it's super expensive to get that equipment. especially stuff that works, that that works well and is good and is
Will
you know,
last.
good quality and will
Yeah.
last. And it's not something that either you can afford, or B, maybe you don't have anyone in your immediate kind of circle that you can borrow from. And so the idea behind the gear library is to be that neighbor, that friend who has all the equipment available for you to take out for free, might I add, for however long you might need. And the vision will be that, and I say will be because I'm kind of planning to launch this in the spring. We're in sort of the ramp up stage right now. But the vision will be that it's not just about the gear itself, but it is about creating community, offering help in learning how to use the equipment, in arranging for guided backcountry trips, Alexis, if you will come, that kind of thing, and just creating that space so that I put out a survey to folks around what they would enjoy about this experience and what would be important to them. Not only was it, I got some feedback saying, this is an opportunity for me to ask questions that I think might be stupid to someone who really has a lot of knowledge in a safe space. And also I got feedback and the idea of going on guided trips with people who look like me is really comforting and something that, that I appreciate. So all the more reason it felt like to continue on this journey, and I'm really excited to be able to launch this in the new year. There's no sense launching it in the dead of winter. I'm sure most people aren't going winter camping, but I've been acquiring lots of donations from the community, connecting with different organizations who are providing new gear, as well as monetary donations to kind of build up the inventory and make this happen. So that's my thing.
Wow, okay. Y'all are really doing it. Some really, really, really incredible work in the community. And Dee, I'm a little bit more familiar with your BIPOC Gear Library from our conversations in the past. And from the moment you told me about it, or I learned about it, I just thought it was just a really incredible initiative. So congrats on the pre-launch. And I know it'll be a really wonderful resource for our community. And even Ciana, the work that you are doing in the school, I think is huge. You were speaking to representation and the fact that, a lot of kids, you don't even see that this is an option for them because they don't see people looking like them, doing these activities. And it brought me back to me growing up, and I grew up in Brampton, but Brampton in the mid-late 90s, and I went to like a predominantly white school. I was often the only black kid in my class. For all of elementary school, most of middle school.
I hear that.
You'd get back from the weekend and people would be like, I went camping, I went to the cottage. And I was always like, what is this cottage thing? Like, what? How does everybody have a cottage except me? You see these different things, even when we went on field trips to like naturey places, they'd always be facilitated by white folks, right? So I think even if it's not said outright, there's this subtle sense that, these spaces aren't for you. You don't see yourself in these spaces. Black people don't do these things, right? Again, even if it's not said out loud, this is kind of the idea that you're getting. You watch TV, when do you see a black family camping, right? It's so important to increase representation, to have the resources available beyond just the sliding scale, like you were saying, addressing the kind of root needs and the root causes of the barriers and the difficulties of accessing these spaces. So congrats to you both for wonderful work in the community. Awesome. So can you help us to understand how access to natural space and the experience of engaging in outdoor activities, outdoor learning, or land-based learning is shaped by race and racism or other aspects of identity? And perhaps you can speak more to your experience as Black women in these spaces.
That's a big question.
It is huge.
I think, there's a lot that can be said, but what's coming to mind for me is just, as a Black woman, when I am interested in taking on something like, maybe like a friction fire workshop, or maybe I want to join like a tracking club in Muskoka, country. I am immediately faced with this like anxiety and fear that, number one, I'm almost certain I'm going to be the only person who's black, who's there. And then I'm a woman. And then I think about, you know, in the ways in which I'm going to be seen and in the ways in which I'm not going to be seen or heard. When I show up into those spaces, you know, like Dee said earlier, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. You know, I'm almost 6 feet, dreads, black, you know, I'm going to stick out. But then maybe I have questions that I'm unsure about, or maybe I have a little bit of knowledge in a skill or an area. And in my experience, those are the times where my voice is minimized or my knowledge isn't taken seriously, or there's a lack of even something as simple as like we get the stares when we're walking or hiking or doing something like that, but then you don't get recognition or eye contact when you're in a group setting and somebody's delivering something. So it's like those little microaggressions that show up almost all the time. And so there's this aspect of, you know, working through that and being like, well, I don't care, I'm gonna still show up and I still wanna learn and I still wanna do these things. But it cuts deep, you know, like it really impacts the way that I can absorb information and impact the way that I want to be seen and heard. And so I'm also looking for ways in which I can learn some of these skills and traditions and naturalist knowledge from non-white folks. You know, I want to learn from Indigenous knowledge keepers. I want to access spaces where, yeah, they might not be exclusively black spaces, but spaces where there's diversity and culture with, you know, worldwide, because we all have a history to land, you know, like no matter where we're from. And that was kind of one thing that's also part of my journey right now, is really finding my, like, figuring out the Afro-Indigenous roots of land connection and lifeways and skills and that sort of thing, because they exist, but where are they? There's also a lot of, you know, in the books and the literature and the talks and that sort of thing, there's a lot of sort of like semi-acknowledgement for where a lot of these things come from, a lot of these skills. I'm thinking particularly about John Young, whom some of you might know, or Tom Brown, who's quite a famous tracker in the US, who give like very vague credit to their teachings from Indigenous elders. But then they take on this role of sort of gatekeeper, and they take on this role of sort of like, yeah, this was my mentor, but now here I am giving you all of this information. So it's really important to like get back to the roots, to get back to the folks who are still practicing this stuff to this day. You know, these aren't things of the past. These are things that are still living and breathing in a lot of communities and a lot of places around the world. And I think the more that we recognize that, especially in Western culture, the closer that we can get to just honoring those who have stewarded land from time immemorial. We can also connect to our own lineages around land and nature. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does for me.
Okay. Honestly, you could keep talking.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that. Because yes, all of that. I think. What was the question again?
Yeah.
I mean, it was great. It was a bit. Okay, no, I got it.
You got it? Okay.
I think to build on that, especially because even hearing your story, Alexis, of your mom's sort of fear and hesitancy around nature, but it was different for your grandmother coming from Trinidad. And you mentioned about kind of Afro-Indigenous kind of ancestral lines. I think what's interesting is that I've had to really reconcile as I've grown older with what it means for me to identify as being Black. And so much of my growing up, you associated Black with urban.
Yes.
It was,
Yeah.
you know, urban lifestyle, urbanization, urban, you know, pop culture and music and all these other things. And everything was urban, nothing was natural, nothing was nature. And I really had a hard time with kind of that disconnect, because for me, that was me. That is me. I was always nature, and so I really had a hard time. And then with Western culture, there always was so much of that feeling of like, black is bad, white is good. That is, I don't know, that internalized racism really kind of gets to you. And so growing up and kind of coming to where I am now, it's finding ways of identifying as Black and as someone who enjoys nature, and finding community in that as well, of how do we have different conversations, how do we get back to our Afro-Indigenous lineages, because our grandmothers were in nature, our grandfathers were fishing, like that is true of being Black is a natural connection to nature, but coming to Turtle Island, somehow everything changed.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would like to reconnect with, I guess, in some way, is what it means to kind of connect with nature with that type of lineage. So, again, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's where I went with
Loving
it.
all of this. Yeah, I love that you both spoke so much about that kind of going back, that return to our roots, Because they talk about getting BIPOC people out into nature, and I'm like, it's getting us back into nature because we've been doing this, this is what we've done. I spoke about my grandma and her experiences with farming and engaging with the land, and the things that it has taught her in terms of community, sustainability. Leaving that scarcity mindset and knowing that there is enough, the land provides for us, but it's up to us to use it in a way that there is enough for everyone, right? So all of these things are ingrained in us, are ingrained in our culture, and it's a matter of getting back.
You need to relearn it.
Yes, that's exactly it. We do need to relearn it. And yeah, while you both were speaking about your experiences as Black women in these spaces, I was thinking about my own experiences, and my experiences out in nature are limited in comparison, but one thing that came to mind is my experience with roller skating, which, as you both know, I've taken up recently. And even in those spaces too, those outdoor spaces, there's definitely feelings of being unwelcome, unwanted. So there's a particular rink that I go to. I won't say which rink it is. And there's me and then my crew, who is mostly Black women, and you can just see that there's a disconnect between us and the older white people who have been there for years and continue to go there and that kind of thing. We are made to feel unwelcome very often, whether it's us being ignored, dismissed. Sometimes we'd be playing our music and they bring out a bigger speaker and play their music louder. Them talking about I our moves and how it's not like traditional and what are we doing and we're being too loud and being too wild and all of these different things. I've even had friends had police called on them for just skating and not bothering anyone. For skating while black. Yeah. So it's really something with these spaces that we're trying to reclaim and we're trying to just exist in. The resistance that we feel, it's really sad and disheartening. So again, I appreciate the work that you both are doing in terms of opening up those spaces and creating safer spaces for folks to engage, to be outdoors and engage with nature. Okay, so Sienna, your work is about empowering youth to access land-based learning, but you're also passionate about land stewardship and taking care of the land. I know you spoke to this a little bit already, but can you tell us more about the connection between access to outdoor space and access to land-based learning and land stewardship?
Yeah, sure. So I think one sort of immediately follows the other. When kids or adults begin to find connection in the natural world, whether that's, connection in the way that you really start to figure out what calls to you out there, whether that's tree ID and you like to find a favorite oak and open a book underneath it, or maybe you're into water-based, water is where your heart's at, canoeing, kayaking, fishing, that sort of thing. whatever it is. Once that happens, there's this, for me in my experience, there was this natural follow-up with, okay, I want to know more about this. I want to know why this still exists and why it's still intact. There's curiosity that begins to deepen around, for me it was plants. It was plants and plant medicine. I started to learn a little bit, and then I wanted to know more. And then I wanted to figure out how I could be a good herbalist in training, if you will. So did that mean going out and wildcrafting every single thing that I saw because I wanted to make, kitchen sink tinctures? No, it meant going out and learning about these plants, but not taking them. It meant sitting with these plants and kind of figuring out the energies of them, because those exist as well. And then it goes back into like what I was talking about before about, the human relationship and the human history around these things. So as human beings, we've done a lot of damage to our natural world and to our earth. But we've also done a lot of preservation. We've done a lot of keeping these things alive and well for us to enjoy them right now. And so land stewardship is a lot of things. It's not conservation. It's not pristine natural parks. It is figuring out how natural spaces can be beautiful wherever they are. It is figuring out so like, for example, the Yorklands or the OR grounds, it's very wild there. And there's this like wild beauty to it. And one of my biggest fears is that, we're gonna come in and we're gonna start to like preserve the whole thing in a way that that just takes away from the original form of it.
Natural biodiversity.
Yeah. So land stewardship is like, how do we coexist with these things without putting our footprints all over them? And so teaching that with kids is really interesting, because one of the things that I like to talk about with them is, we'll go out on a walk and they'll be like, whoa, St. John's wort, and they're ready to go and pick it. And I'm like, whoa, don't pick it. Why are you gonna take it? They're like, because it's pretty, I wanna take it home. I was like, we need to leave it. Why? It's like, because we're not, as humans, there's this like somewhat of a colonial mindset that when we find something, we can take it and bring it home. And now we're robbing somebody else of that opportunity to view the St. John's wort or to enjoy it. So instead of
animal too.
Exactly. So let's just sit with it. Let's look at it. Let's look at the tiny little petals. Let's talk about the medicines that exist within this plant. And then let's come back tomorrow and visit it again. Let's watch how it changes over time. That's an example of land stewardship. That's an example of how kids can be taught how to coexist with the natural world without a colonial framework of taking, of this is mine, and this belongs to me. Yeah,
That sounds beautiful.
I know. I want to go to that school.
We have adult programs. Come
Okay,
on.
sweet. No, I really love that, and that can be extended to many areas of life, right? Just learning to just appreciate, right, rather than taking and having to own and having to, yeah, I do really love that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I really love this question. Empowering racialized people to access outdoor space through gear, through education, or other means has both individual and broader impacts. How do you think increased access to outdoor spaces or outdoor learning impacts individual racialized people? And what do you think are the broader impacts for our communities or society more broadly?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've kind of talked about the individual impact quite a bit, like even just in our experiences, but like broadly, even coming back to what you talked about, Alexis, about connecting through the pandemic, I just think that there's just, clearly we've identified that we as humans need to coexist with nature. We need nature connection. It's great for our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, so many reasons. And doing things like creating the gear library, creating spaces, and introducing children just means that there's more opportunity for it to be normalized, that everyone is out there doing the things and connecting with nature in the most natural way. even in what you were just talking about, Sienna, like I think about my connection to nature as being quite spiritual, which is such a mindset of indigenous learning where everything has energy, that plant, that rock, that bird, you know, and we are just sort of coexisting and part of that beautiful web of energetic flow. And so that is, I always say nature is my church, like that's where I hang out, that's where I get grounded, that's where I do a lot of meditative work and things like that. If more people could have that opportunity, like how great would that be? And how great would that be for even some of the kind of social issues that we're dealing with today in just normalizing and seeing each other as all the same in this natural world that we exist in. And yes, we've co-opted and taken over and done all the colonial crap that we have done, but you know, of what we do have left, then we start to really come together on that stewardship piece, on that preservation piece. And learning from the land, and I got chills when you were describing just that idea of like kids not only learning to just appreciate and leave things on their own, but then to like come back to it the next day and learn from like what has changed, because we're all changing beings as well. And it is a great kind of reflection even for kids to, you know, think about themselves and how they change day by day. So yeah, again, maybe not connected to the question, but that's where it's
Beautiful.
Broader impact?
Yeah, broader
Okay.
impact.
I think for me, like the big thing that I want to see in terms of the way, like I want to see more people like us out there. I want to see better connections to cultural like diversity within a natural landscape. I want to see more teachers, more educators, and those who have, I want adults to be confident in their skills and knowledge and help teach, you know, all kinds of kids what they know. And I think that comes with just having more discussions like this, having things like the Gear Library existing, having things like Guelph Outdoor School, like adult programs happening.
Yeah, because you mentioned to me that like even there's parents out there who are concerned about putting their kids in the programs.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like changing that too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Telling the story,
Yeah.
right? Like it's kind of selling why is nature important? You know, why is it important for your kid to connect to the natural world? Yes, studies and academics, like that is always going to be a really big focal point for parents, especially parents who are new to Canada. And I find that is often the case. You know, I don't have to do a lot of storytelling to, you know, families who've been here for generations. They get it, they see it, they're able to like get there. But the families who are new, when I was working in the Shelldale area, a lot of Ethiopian and Eritrean families, you know, language was a barrier, that was the first thing, but again, just telling that story, it was getting lost on them. They weren't able to see it. And so I wonder too if, you know, a broader impact is just having opportunities to connect with communities and families so that they can see, you know, why this is important, not only for their child, but for them. You know, what ways did they connect to nature when they were growing up in Ethiopia or wherever? Because I know it's there, it's just getting it to come out.
Yes, thank you. And I love that you both spoke to that kind of community piece, because I know that's one thing that I'm seeing as kind of that broader impact for a community, for the community, is that collective healing that's coming from it. Like, just as an example, there are so many Black planters that I follow on Instagram, like from Plant Queen to Garden Marcus to Black Forager, someone called Minty Bongwater, love him. Yeah, all of these, yeah, I'm not even kidding. But all of these, all of these, these Black creatives who have found healing, who have found community through plant life. I even have a friend who, she's created a company called Rooted Bush Tea, where she takes bush tea, where's that word bush again, which just is a generalization for fields and forests in Caribbean. But she makes what she calls rooted bush tea, and she takes teas that are sourced from St. Kitts and Nevis, like soursop, moringa, like those kinds of plants. and sells them as teas here. I know people who are selling things like sea moss, like these different ways that we have historically connected to the land for generations, for centuries, that may have been lost in the last few years for whatever reason. Just reconnecting it and also reconnecting to it and sharing it with our community. That's really what I love to see. And doing it in our own way, you know? Like, I love when I go camping and like I go to pass by campgrounds and I see a non-white family there playing their music and cooking things that you may not see in a traditional like campfire. Like, I don't like s'mores personally. So yeah, let's make something else. I love seeing Black people with dreadlocks camping, you know? Like, I think there needs to be just so much more of that. So yeah, that's really what I love to see, and the work that you folks are doing. I'm certainly supporting that. Awesome. So we'll do one more question before we open the floor up to you folks. So as lifelong outdoor learners and adventurous, what future are you imagining for BIPOC folks in these spaces, and what are your hopes for change?
I really like what you just said, Alexis, about having BIPOC folks being in these spaces and being themselves. Like, I think that's, I don't think I've thought about that up until now. You know, there's an element of like, let's get out there, and then once we're out there, you know, how do we have to behave? How do we have to act? You know, so I would love to see families and kids just being who they are, being true to what they know is comfortable. And I just, more teachers, more educators who are doing this work, who represent diversity, cultural diversity. I want to see more kids coming out to my programs and the Guelph Outdoor School programs from different pockets of Guelph and beyond. I think there is a lot to be done around accessibility and barriers to these spaces, whether it's transportation, food, gear, you know, whatever it is, like just dissolving of those barriers needs to happen in order for these spaces to be safe, to be welcoming, to be inclusive. Yeah, that's my short answer.
And I think even beyond that, it is, like, it's everything you just said as well, but it's also just having these types of conversations so that we, as a society, can kind of decolonialize our view of what outdoor space and recreation looks like. If you think of the fact that you go to a campground and it's primarily white families there, you know, mimicking survival for a lot of people, you know, pitching a tent and all those. These are things that people, you know, coming up from the Underground Railroad or as refugees from other countries needed to do, not wanted to do, but needed to do. And we've kind of like changed this into like, let's pretend to survive. It's kind of a weird thing when you think about it, right? And as much as like I love to camp and I'll remain doing it, it's still sort of honoring kind of where that came from and having conversations around why that can be problematic and how we can maybe approach it differently. That's what I hope that, you know, all of these conversations, all of these wonderful people who are looking to reduce barriers and create change and increase representation, it's also just sort of prompting all of these conversations around decolonializing this whole practice of outdoor activity and enjoyment. Yeah.
Yes, okay, well, thank you both. Lovely answers, lovely conversation. If you can move on to the next part of the program, I guess, and we'll open the floor up to questions from you folks. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, and we wanted to stop recording, right?
Yes.
Yes, and we will stop recording.